Hello, 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 everyone. This is Helen Higginbotham from When Black Women Gather. Thank you for joining us for another Sunday. Today, we have an interesting program where we've invited Black men and Black women, and of course, our young people, to talk about encouraging Black men, encouraging Black men's mental health and wellness. We spent a lot of time, I think, paying attention to Black women and our self-care and our wellness and our health, and we support um, our men. But what do our men need? So we're going to talk about that today. And we have three comebacks. Thank you guys for coming back again. We had them. I think it's been a year, right? My God, where did it go? And it was such a popular program, and we decided let's do it again. So thank you all for coming back. And Michelle, you can take it over and do the introductions. And please keep yourself on mute. I see some people who are not on mute, and Kilpia, if you and Michelle could help me make sure people are on mute. And if you have questions, put them in the chat, and the guys will tell us at what point they're going to entertain questions. Okay, goodbye. Okay, go ahead, Michelle. Your thing.
Thank you, Ms. Higgy. Good afternoon, everyone. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our fantastic trio of doctors, Tyce, Michael, and Alfonso. Get ready to be inspired by their talent and expertise. I will give a very quick overview of their bios so they can focus on encouraging Black men's mental health. Meet Dr. Alfonso Ferguson, a trailblazing Afro-Caribbean male whose journey from the Caribbean to the U.S. has deeply influenced his personal and professional identity. With a commitment to creating brave and inclusive spaces, Dr. Ferguson strives to empower marginalized communities to be heard, affirmed, and celebrated. Holding licenses as a mental health counselor and professional counselor across multiple states, along with certifications as an approved clinical supervisor and national certified counselor, he is dedicated to providing culturally responsive counseling services. With a PhD in counseling from Montclair State University, Dr. Ferguson now serves as a core faculty member in the counseling department at Saybrook University, where he passionately prepares future counselors to be culturally responsive and socially just in their practice. His mission is clear: by equipping counselors with the skills to navigate the complexity of intersectionality, we pave the way for a brighter, more inclusive future for all. Welcome, Dr. Ferguson. Meet Dr. Tyce Nadrich, seen it right, a multifaceted professional dedicated to empowering individuals and couples through counseling and education. With a wealth of experience and qualifications, Dr. Nadrich serves as a counselor educator, licensed professional counselor, clinical supervisor, consultant, author, speaker, and devoted father, specializing in providing therapeutic support to individuals from historically marginalized backgrounds. He holds a PhD in counseling from Montclair State University, a master's in education and clinical mental health counseling from St. John's University, and a BA in psychology from the City University of New York. Currently as an associate professor of counseling at Mercer University in Atlanta, Georgia, and as a professional counselor and clinical training coordinator at Balance Mental Health Counseling in Huntington, New York, Dr. Nadrich actively contributes to the field through his research on racially ambiguous and multiracial mental health. With numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters to his name, Dr. Nadrich is dedicated to advancing mental health awareness and support for all. Welcome, Dr. Nadrich. Meet Dr. Michael Hannon, a distinguished licensed counselor, author, speaker, educator, clinician, researcher, husband, and father, who passionately advocates for the well-being of Black fathers and Black figures, particularly those with autistic children. Dr. Hannon's expertise and advocacy have garnered recognition from prestigious publications such as the New York Times, Autism Speaks, Black Enterprise, and the Huffington Post. With over 35 publications to his name and serving as the editor of his book, Black Fathering and Mental Health, Dr. Hannon is a leading voice in the field. He earned his PhD in counselor education and supervision from Penn State, along with educational specialists from Rider University and master's and bachelor's degrees from the University of Delaware. Currently serving as an associate professor at Montclair State University and practicing at the Center for Marcus in Trenton, New Jersey, Dr. Hannon focused his clinical work on children, adolescents, and adults, with a specific emphasis on supporting Black clients. Welcome, Dr. Hannon. We're thrilled to welcome all of you back. Dr. Michael, the floor is yours for discussion.
Thank you guys again. We're going to bow out and give it all to you.
Well, we appreciate that. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay. Awesome. We just obviously need to first say thank you. Thank you to the When Black Women Gather team, Miss Higgy, Dr. Michelle Burgess, Miss Calthea, everybody who's here in community. We appreciate being here with you. And Dr. Michelle, we were just remarking, we need those bios. however you made them abridged, we need them because they are
Okay.
much more efficient than maybe what I shared with you and some other folks. So we appreciate being here. Um, and just a lot of gratitude. And our hope at the end of the day is that this conversation is just that, is discourse and conversation, and not just us talking at you. We want to engage in questions and conversation with you, thinking specifically about how we all do our best to support Black men's mental health and well-being, Black boys and men and their mental health and well-being, because we don't believe that those are distinct areas for curiosity and addressing. So let me let me start here. No, let me start also by saying uh, Dr. Nadrich and Dr. Ferguson, they might refer to me as a mentor in some spaces, but I need to express my gratitude, my admiration for both of them as well. They are my brothers. I love them. They know that I ain't saying nothing now that I haven't said to them personally. So it's great to be with them in this space as well and share time with them. Um, Let me start here, and I'm going to put this in the chat just so that we kind of working from a same kind of operational definition of what is mental health. You and I and many of us may hear the term mental health and mental wellness used with some frequency. And what I provided for you just now in the chat is a definition provided by the World Health Organization, who I know y'all super smart people in this space. You know, the World Health Organization does extremely important work tending to the mental and physical needs of communities across the globe, doing a lot of advocacy and intervention work. But if you read this definition, and I know you all can read, but I'm going to give us some audio input as well. I just want to share this and maybe pull some highlights from this definition. Mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. Now, I just want to stop there because if we take those three criteria, cope with the stresses of life, realize my abilities, and learn and work well and contribute to my community, we can argue reasonably that if those things aren't happening in anybody's life, then we might suggest that our mental health is at risk. Right. So if you're not able to contribute to your community in the ways that you want, that make you feel good and give you some sense of satisfaction, if you're having trouble in your relationships, whether they be platonic or romantic, whether you're having barriers to realizing your abilities, both personally and or professionally or in other spaces, and if the typical day-to-day stressors, normative stressors of life are causing you to behave or you're experiencing some measure of psychological distress, I like to use the term by saying something has got you off center. So there doesn't have to be this crisis that you're experiencing with respect to your mental health. If any of these things are happening in your life, we all might be in the need, have the need to engage with a mental health professional. So I want to make sure we mention that. We framed our time to hopefully address three overarching questions, one of which is, what have Black boys and men in your life and in our life been taught about our mental health? So I want you to consider that, and we'll put these questions in the chat. Two, how can we support and encourage the Black men in our lives to prioritize their mental health and wellness? And then thirdly, are there unique considerations for Black men that may not exist for other people? Our answer is yes. Our answer is yes. And so for the remainder of our time, we want to hopefully have some conversation with you that goes literally across the lifespan and give you some insight that we've developed over time based on our clinical practice, based on our research, based on the things we've been able to learn and to share, and answer questions that you have that may be helpful. Last thing I'll say is this: in the best case scenario, thinking about early childhood and adolescence, I want you to think about the Black boys in your life, your nephews, your athletes, your grandsons, your sons, whoever they are. those Black boys and adolescents in your life, in the best case scenario, we hope that they have consistent caregiver and school support. We hope that they have healthy relationships modeled for them. We hope that they have secure attachments with those caregivers, that they develop a positive sense of self and a healthy sense of masculinity, and that they have optimism about their futures. And if they don't have any of those, what's standing in the way? And there are some unique things that I think we can consider for Black boys and adolescents about this trajectory early in their lives to give specific and more precise time and attention to encouraging their mental health and wellness. I hope that makes sense. And so I'll pause. I'll turn it over to my brother Tyce to talk about some of these earlier developmental tasks and milestones, and how, as clinicians, we do our work, and clinicians who care about Black men and Black boys, how we attempt to address some of these things.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike, and thank you all for having us. As Mike said, when we talked about coming to hang out with you all, we had so many ideas about how to have this conversation, and we sort of landed on this chronology, sort of walking through life and what does mental health look like for young Black, well, for people, but also for Black boys and men throughout life. What does it mean to encounter stress, difficulties, successes, positive results? So we wanted to sort of, we're going to walk through that chronology, and we wanted to make sure we laid the foundation, as we're thinking about what it means for young kids to grow up. And there are, what we wanted to make as practical as possible. So to start, there are dozens, if not more, developmental theories for how we understand what children are supposed to encounter throughout life. What tasks are they supposed to overcome? What experiences are meant to foster their overall wellness and cognitive and social emotional wellness? There's a lot of theories on that, and I don't think we want to dive too deep into that. What we will say, though, is that across all these theories, generally speaking, a lot of the things that Mike said before about having a household that is supportive and engaging, and the word that I'll use is stimulating. We want to make sure that folks are stimulated, and that stimulation is in many directions. It doesn't just mean that we're challenging them to think, but it also means that we're challenging them to process and to emote. These are all parts of what it means to engage in a stimulating environment. And when we think specifically about a lot of the ways that we understand how life works now, we're thinking less, stages of development and more just interaction. There are messages that everyone receives on a daily basis that influence the way in which we understand the world. I'll go on a brief tangent here because I mentioned before we started recording, I have two young children. I have a recently 2-year-old and an almost 4-year-old, and we made a decision. We were like, we're going to try to raise these kids as sort of neutral as possible. So we're going with colors that are neutral. They don't have stigma attached to them or connotations attached to them. We're going with all these inclusive books. We're doing all this other stuff. And them kids turned out to be exactly who they were going to be. And some of those things are the stereotypes that we tried to avoid regardless. And I think it's important to understand that, yes, there's a biological component to this. Also, there are so many sources of information that these kids have that aren't us. The world is telling them things about what girls are supposed to do, what boys are supposed to do, what this color means, or what this action means. These things are unavoidable. No matter how much we want to protect our children, these things are unavoidable. The moment if you do turn on a TV, the moment you turn on TV, but the moment they step out into the world, this is what's happening. We send our kids to school. They're going to receive messages about identity, race, gender, phenotype, the way that you look and what it means. All of these things are there. And when we think specifically about Black boys, Black youth, young Black boys, I think it's important for us to question, what are the messages that they are receiving out in the world? I'll start again. We're surrounded by a bunch of really smart folks here, so we don't really have to talk. We know that there are negative messages and the consequences of that. Go back to the Clark doll experiments. We're decades removed from that, and we saw that, as heartbreaking as that is. And if anyone who hasn't seen that, I just encourage you, hop on YouTube and just type in Clark doll experiments, and also just be mindful. It's not fun to watch. It's actually quite painful to watch those videos, but even today, what messages are Black boys receiving about the world? And I would challenge folks, and I'm reflecting on the work that I do with kids, or less so these days, but with parents and their children, is what messages are they receiving about who they're supposed to be within the household? What are the roles and the dynamics look like within the household? Then, as we go into public spaces, what messages are they possibly absorbing about skin tone, about seeing these folks in certain areas, but not these folks in certain areas? Another example is that we were quite my family at least, and my hunch is for my colleagues as well, and for many of you, we were quite intentional to make sure that there was diverse representation among the doctors that my kids went to, among the schools that they are going to attend and do attend. In the absence of that, though, what messages are they receiving passively and actively? Also, what messages are they receiving directly from their own encounters out into the world? There are a lot of narratives that can be painful, but also can be encouraging. And we, as individuals, as parents, as providers, as healthcare providers, need to be mindful of how these messages can be internalized. Messages about having to grow up quickly persist. And I'll give one example that applies to, that we think at least applies to Black men. We often talk about trying to balance this idea of kids growing up, kids being kids, but also kids growing up and being safe. Well, my hunch is that any of you all who have young Black boys in your life, at some point, probably when they were young, you had to have a talk with them about what it means for them to navigate public spaces, specifically in situations where their life may be at risk. Thinking about what it means to, how do you interact with the police and things along those lines. These are conversations that happen with kids at a very young age, but they also send messages about what it means for them to exist in the world. This is also separate from the unfortunate, very biased messaging that is still overt in the world. Messages about masculinity, there's a lot of them. Some of them are very healthy, and some of them can be very unhealthy at times. How do we teach our young boys to negotiate these ideas about masculinity? Emotionality, or emoting, is another big one. The notion, and I think this one is probably less covert, still quite overt and less covert these days. Whereas I think messages about, racism, or at least overt racism, are a little bit more covert these days, depending on what spaces you occupy. Ideas about masculinity are still fairly overt. Ideas about stoicism and how we apply that to young boys. And I'm actually going to lean on Mike because he has a really good quote for this, but what emotions are we teaching our children to express when they get upset? I'm gonna let Mike say his quote because he's got a good one that he's repeated multiple times about the emotions that we teach boys versus we teach girls.
So I'm noticing some of the questions in the chat, and we promised to address them, and we thank you for them, the comments and the questions. And to Tyce's point, I want you to think about, again, the Black boys in your life, and whatever relationship you have with them. When I was a doctoral student at Penn State, I had a great professor who had years and years of clinical experience, and she said, cross-culturally, in her observation, she noticed that boys and men are encouraged to emote in one of two ways. They can safely share their anger, and they can safely share their lust for women and girls. Girls and women, on the contrary, are socialized to engage with every other form of emotional expression, except for lust and anger. And so in the When Black Women Gather community, I can only imagine the messages that you have received as female identified folks about if and when you could express your anger, or if and when you could express your attraction to anyone. And likewise, think about the boys, the Black boys in your life, and the ways they are encouraged to express their anger, right? We can handle conflict because we can go out and shoot the fade, right? We can knuckle up and fight, and that's appropriate and acceptable, and in some ways encouraged. And if we want to think about the ways that our Black boys are socialized to be hypersexual against women and girls, and those things being acceptable in our community. So again, this is about us being constructively critical. Y'all know we love Black people just as much as you love Black people. And we have to have the courage to call in some of the problematic messaging that our children get, and the safety and the modeling that can come as a result of our Black boys seeing us express anything but, or everything in addition to, our lust and our anger. Do they see us say, "I love you"? Do they see Black men hug other Black men with affection and with care? Do they see Black men cry? And under what circumstances do they do that? Right. And so these are the things with the messaging that we get, but that gendered socializing that takes place many times in our communities can literally put our Black boys and subsequently our Black adolescent and men at risk for their mental health being disrupted and being off-centered. Just food for thought. I'll stop talking now.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm grateful, because that's your piece. I don't want to take it from you. And what I want to do is I want to ground us. I'm going to make this as practical as possible. As they shared in the introduction, we're all clinicians. I'm working with a young Black boy right now. He's a biracial Black kid. He's 15, I believe. He's raised with his mother, who's white. His father is very active. They live in the boroughs. His father is literally a few train stations away. He's always been there. And this is not explaining why, but at 15 years old, the ability for him to identify emotions is very limited. His ability to identify emotions that are connected to vulnerability are very narrow. He is very comfortable identifying anger. That's an easy emotion for him. And I'll give you all an example. I was actually meeting with him. I meet with him almost weekly. And when I met with him about 3 weeks ago, we had a bit of an incident where he had gone out drinking with friends, and he's not a drinker. He's actually an athlete. But he drank a lot, to the point where his friends got really scared, called his parents. Father came down, picked him up. He's throwing up. He's, just absolute mess, had way too much to drink. And afterwards, when I met with him about a little under a week later, so what got you there? What got you to the place that you took in so much alcohol? What was that? And there was a lot of defensiveness. It was a one-time thing. It was this, it was that. It's nothing, it's light, all of that. I happened to have known that his friends shared that a girl had broken up with him about 3 days before or so. I knew this. He didn't know that I knew this. So I gently nudged at him. I said, "Hey, I heard something about a breakup. You think that had anything to do with it?" And his immediate reaction at first was almost like a disrespectful, like that was the reaction. But it was what followed was immense anger. He was furious. He was yelling at me. If I was in the same room as him, I don't know. He might have took a swing at me if we were in the same room. But the fury that came out of him, that was connected to pain. We got there eventually. We've met since, and we eventually got there. But his immediate response was anger. And if we think about it in terms of the way that he engaged with himself after the breakup, his immediate response was, "Let's put it inward. Let's not put it outward. Let's put it inward. Let's bring it in. Let's hold in our emotions." They came out when he drank. And he was able to identify that it's easier to say these things aloud after I drank. And he was also, after the fact, able to identify afterwards that when I asked him about it, He didn't like how it felt. We had to break out an old school feelings chart to figure out what the emotion was, but he did not like the way that he felt. And he's so uncomfortable with that emotional range. I was hurt. I was sad. It's a lot easier to be angry. He's comfortable with anger. So I share that, again, trying to make it practical, but also just to highlight his familiarity with emotions. I appreciated Mike's quote because that's his life. He is very comfortable with anger. In fact, anger was likely reinforced within his life as an athlete. His anger was probably positively reinforced. Culturally, socially, his anger was probably reinforced. And we have words for men who show emotions outward. We have words for men who might cry in public. I'm not going to say them, but you all know what the words are. We got a lot of, and most of them aren't good. We have a lot of derogatory words for men who are emotionally expressive. I do not think in his life he received safe spaces. Remember what Mike framed this as in terms of what we're hoping under the best of circumstances. He didn't receive the safe spaces throughout his childhood to develop a full emotional spectrum that existed outside of these sort of foundational emotions. So how do we work with young brothers like that? We have to, one, model the space. We have to show that the space can exist. Two, we have to recognize that when we put people in uncomfortable positions, they're going to be uncomfortable for a little while. And you all know when you're uncomfortable, you might act up a certain way as well. When I'm uncomfortable, I'm not necessarily always the most pleasant person to be around. So when we're working with young boys, when we're trying to support these young folks, their discomfort, we have to be ready for that. We have to recognize that it might not be about us. It's about them getting through the discomfort and trying to figure out something new. New things are hard. New things can make us feel off. And then we have to teach and allow them to learn along with us. Is, all right, what's this thing that we're feeling? Let's put a name on it. Let's put a label on it so we know what it is, so we can recognize it. And hopefully it's this way, next time we start feeling it, we can actually own it and do something with it. That emotional, that the ability to emote and the ability to identify emotions is really important. I want to make sure, and before I toss this back to my colleagues, I want to highlight one more thing that I think is very important for right now when we're talking about youth and adolescence, is the role of social media where we are today. I'm going to put this in two different contexts. One is the content at which youth are able to access everything, positive, negative, and everything in between, the full spectrum. Everything is accessible. And for some of us, and for perhaps a lot of us, that wasn't our childhood. I know what my childhood was with regard to the internet, and it was limited compared to what it is now. And for those of you who are older than me, it was even more limited there. So recognizing what our folks have access to is really important, because what they're able to access, what they're able to engage with, will influence the ways in which that they understand the world. Specifically within that, though, for Black boys, there's an unavoidable nature to social media as well. So when tragedies happen, when traumas happen, we don't have to go looking for them. They find us. They dive into our phones. They dive into our world, and we're forced to encounter with them unless we have walls up to protect us. And even then, the walls they might not be good enough, because your homie's got the phone and they're going to walk up to you and say, hey, did you see this? Hey, did you see this? That type of unavoidable nature of what it means to confront reality, the harshness of reality, the traumas of reality. I want to be clear, the beauty of it as well, because there's a lot of good that happens out there too. We are connecting right now because of technology, and we have to recognize that's the benefit of it, is that we're all here in this space, regardless of where we are in the country and what time zones and everything. We're all here. And I'm going to get a notification on my phone if there's a mass murder. I'm going to get a notification on my phone, as I have in the past, when Black people are treated unjustly and unfairly. What messages does that send to young boys if they are inundated with these messages of inequity, of expendability? How do we encounter that? How do we address that? We have to work on those counter narratives constantly. It's not so different from that idea of that diverse exposure that I was hinting toward about, is recognizing that they have to see people who look like them across a variety of spaces as much as we can. We also have to work on the counter narratives as well. The counter narrative that you are not expendable, the counter narrative that you have much to offer, but also the reality of what the world is. It's a really tough place for anyone who is raising Black youth and Black boys to exist in. But we have to acknowledge the role of social media, the accessibility of everything that is in the world. I'm going to pull back because I know we have more things, and I even had another client that I was thinking about bringing to this space, but I want to make sure that I'm giving space for my colleagues to fill any of the gaps as we talk about development of young Black boys.
Thank you, Dr. Nadrich. I want to jump in because I've been silently waiting for my turn and my brain is on fire because you're saying so many things that are resonating with me, not only in my practice, but as a Black man, right? Just going back to some of the, not necessarily the counter narratives, but you were talking about like the expression and freedom to express emotions, the ways in which Black men and Black boys emote. And one of the things that sat with me that I wanted to kind of expand on was, you know, within our community, how are we conditioning and supporting Black boys to be able to emote? And how do you pour from a cup where you don't know what the flavor of the drink is, right? Because it's probably relational, cultural, where we've been conditioned for generations to show up a certain way, to not express certain emotions, to not give in certain ways in order to, whether it's respectability politics, right? As a Black man, you have to show up and do this and that. But one of the things that I think about is like how it just goes back to even before you were born. We're talking about like gender reveals. If you know you're having a girl, everything is pink. If you know you're having a boy, everything is blue. And it goes into, you know, boys don't cry. You know, girls can do this, boys can do this. You got to be mindful, boys don't do this. And then it goes into man up, toughen up. You got to be strong. You got to show up like this. You got to do this. And that these messages start from very early on. It started before you were born. It started with your parents, your grandparents, your great-grand, etc. And so almost being mindful of, we can't just wake up one day and expect our sons, our brothers, our nephews to start expressing all the range of emotions that we think, now that we've gotten this insight in this conversation from 3 Black male counselor educators and counselors, that, okay, I got some tools, boom, I got to do it. You have to do the work too. I have so many clients, and I see mainly adults, Black men and women, who have limited range of emotions that they are comfortable or aware of expressing. So as Dr. Nay just shared, I bring in the feelings wheel. A lot of my clients are virtual. I ask you, how are you feeling? They're like, you know, I think I'm good and da-da-da. And I was like, thank you for the logic, but how are you feeling? And then I pull up the feelings wheel and we take some time and we talk through it. And in that, we're educating them on the range of feelings. We're creating safety for them to be able to express those feelings. I recognize that there's a level of vulnerability that is required for one to say, you know, I'm feeling really anxious, or, you know, I'm feeling really disappointed. You know, I'm feeling really overwhelmed in whatever the situation is. So being mindful of doing the work yourself in order for you to pour into someone else's cup is really important. I'm going to stop there because I know I got a couple more things that I want to add in, but that was really ringing true for me as an important piece, not only in the work that I do, but how I position myself within our community.
I'm going to jump in here. Thank you both, and I'm trusting this information is coming through clearly. I want to give some time and attention to some of the comments and questions that have been dropped in the chat. Some of them having to do with the messages that we adopt or have been given to us, things that we hear. Jocelyn's asking about systemic racism and the possibility of post-traumatic slave syndrome, and whether you agree with Dr. DeGruy or not about post-traumatic slave syndrome. I think that there's an important end to Brother Lee's question. I think there's something to be said about the reality of systemic racism and its influence on our lives, right? So we know it's been empirically validated that racism influences not just our mental health, but our physical health, right? It leads to higher blood pressure, chronic, it contributes to chronic conditions like diabetes and things like that, right? It exacerbates those things. And what we have to decide as folks who are in community with Black men and who love Black men is we have to reconcile that while we may want to resist and disrupt forms of racism that influence our Black boys and men in negative ways, that we are still subject to the same forms of racism. And so white folks and people in positions of power and influence, they may enact systemic racist acts and policies like underemployment, like incarceration, and in other ways, like the tax code, right? In other ways that we see systems working against Black and brown folks, but we ain't exempt. And we've drank from the pool of racism. So to one of the questions in the chat about, I think Michelle's comment about hearing a message about light-skinned boys having the freedom and the privilege to maybe be more honest and authentic, and darker skinned boys having to take on an identity that may be more confrontational. Those are all symptomatic of internalized racism and are the potential we have to enact even more harm on our Black boys when we start talking like that. Like you can't talk in a proper way, and or the way that you talk is absolutely appropriate, and you can talk like that and it's cool, right? And these are the things that I want us to be aware of. And the last thing I'll say is when we're thinking about Black boys and adolescents, please remember that all behavior communicates. When you're in community with your Black boys, your nephews, your cousins, whoever they are, your grandsons, your sons, when we don't have the words, this is across genders and across races, racial categories, when we don't have the words, we do have the behavior. And we have to be brave and patient enough to ask ourselves, what is this behavior communicating? Right? So if our boys are acting up in school, there's been a discipline issue or maybe underperforming academically, what's the behavior communicating? There may be fear for rejection. There may be concern about being stereotyped as too smart or white. May not have the words to say that. But in working and trying and attempting to be patient with our Black boys, it's understanding that all behavior communicates. And again, that cuts across all genders, right? But understanding, particularly young people who don't have the words. Alfonso's talking about he works with adults and I work with adults and Tyce works with adults who haven't been taught the range of emotionality. Consider that for somebody who's 8 and not being able to say, that teacher scares me. That teacher berates other students and I don't want to say anything because I don't want to get berated like another student, right? And so these are the things I'm thinking about specifically with younger people and behavior. I'll stop there and maybe we'll begin to talk about some of the challenges and the tasks that come up in early adulthood as we transition from that point of life into a different one. Now, I'll turn the floor back over to Dr. Ferguson for him to weigh in a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to use Dr. Hannon's model and start with the best case scenario, right? So let's say best case scenario, we're talking about early adulthood Black men who have healthy relationships with family members and peers, who are finding some measure of career success and satisfaction, who can actually access spaces where they can expand the full range of their emotions like we've been discussing, and learning to manage their financial lifestyle in healthy ways, but yet still something is standing in their way. What could be standing in their way? You know, I think, you know, a lot of things that come up for me right now is just reflecting on some of those past experience. I find that the formative years are some of the most intricate and important times in everyone's life. And I have Black men that I work with today who have all the things that I just described, the best case scenario, but are also still struggling emotionally and mentally. right? There's some capacity, whether it's past trauma, whether there's challenges. I have folks that I see right now who are wildly successful and still don't feel like enough. And so it's like, how do we support those individuals who are in that phase of their life? So Erickson, I know Erickson development and stages of change talk about this is the time in your young adulthood, your earlier formative years between 18 and 40, right? Early adulthood is where you're focusing on intimacy and isolation. Intimacy and isolation, I immediately think about some of the messages one may receive during their formative years and how that impacts how they show up in relationships. Whether that's intimate relationships or platonic relationships, what does it mean about you? If you are not the quote unquote pretty boy or the athlete, or if you have a certain skin color or you have a certain SES or racial identity, what is that, or ethnic identity, what does that mean about you, about the spaces that you occupy? And when I think about that, I think about how do we continue to perpetuate those narratives even as adults, and how does that impact their comfort or safety in expressing a range of emotions, right? So we may have folks who are just completely shutting down, or we may have folks that always present as angry or aggressive, or we may have folks who act out with lust, right? Whether it's having multiple girls or multiple partners at the same time, just not willing to express a level of vulnerability and connectivity with someone because they may feel exposed in some regard. So these are things that we always have to be mindful, not only as a community, but as a family member, as a partner, and how is it on a systemic level, a cultural level, a community level, how are those narratives informing how our brothers, our nephews, our sons are showing up, our uncles are showing up in these spaces? In the same token, one of the things that I was recently reading as I was preparing for this workshop is there's this woman I follow on social media. Her name is Dr. Rachel Martin. And one of the posts that she recently did was around the 5 stereotypes of Black men, which was really, really eye-opening, because I think even though a lot of them sound really antiquated and has like a slavery connotation, if you will, it's still very much present for us today. I think one of the things that we're all we've heard before or familiar with is where Black men are over-sexualized or hypersexualized, the mandingo, right? That experience of, oh, if you're a Black man, then your shoe size, blah, 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 you should show up a certain kind of way. And how does that impact one if they don't meet the size criteria, if you will, that society assumes you should have? How does that impact one's mental health and emotional well-being? In the same token, she talks about the Sambo, the very childlike, the very passive, the very infantilized Black archetype of a Black man and showing up in spaces. And should you be doing a certain kind of work and being in an environment where you're more soft-spoken or your people skills are not what is expected of you and you're being treated a certain kind of way, how does that impact your mental health? And then there's the brute or the savage, the angry Black man, if you will, the one that's always aggressive, the one that's quote unquote mad at the world. But I don't know if we spend a lot of time zooming out and recognizing or understanding what's really behind the anger. Is it just the emotion that you've been taught or conditioned that is okay above all the emotions? Are there things that are happening on a really regular basis that is unjust? Are you just in a space where you can't completely be yourself? So as a defense mechanism, as a way to protect yourself, you show up as angry or aggressive. And even when I think about, or I say that out loud, this idea of anger or aggressive or this angry Black man, who says, like, what is your definition of angry or aggression? Just because I talk a certain way, that means I'm angry or I'm mad at you? Just because I'm excited in a different way than you are, does that mean I'm angry or I'm mad at you? I don't think so. And so it's a society as a whole, right? But also our job to like really zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Then there's the John Henry, the one that is very clean cut and going back to respectability politics, right? You show up a certain way, you do the job in a certain way. I don't know if you all have seen this, but I saw a video a couple of years ago And I think it was I can't remember, maybe it was San Francisco or LA. There was a city in California that was being desegregated in the 60s. And there were a bunch of Black people in the room. They were like, yeah, I don't want these savages to come in. They're going to mess up what we've built. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And there's like this divide within our community sometimes because you're not showing up a certain way. Your Black don't look like they're Black. And we see it oftentimes within the immigrant population, right? Where immigrants are migrating here and for whatever reason, there's a divide. We look the same, we have similar skin colors and skin complexion, but there's this narrative that we have of Africans look like this, Haitians look like this, Jamaicans do this, etc., that continues to create separation for us. But who wins in that? We don't win. I don't think I'm winning. I don't feel like I'm winning when that happens for us, right? And then last but not least, she talks about the Uncle Tom. The uncle, and we all are familiar with the Uncle Tom narrative of the do right by white people, prioritize whiteness in various ways. And I think in some regards, we're all subjective of that. And I think it was Dr. Nadrich who talked about colorism earlier and how that, maybe it was Dr. Hannon, I don't want to discredit anyone, but talk about colorism in regards to how if it is ravishing our community and has ravished our community. Whereas, lighter skinned folks are more aligned with what is considered westernized beauty for some folks, whereas darker skinned folks are being treated in different ways. I don't know how it plays out very much these days, because I know we have more access to information and knowledge and the internet is expansive, but I do know when I was growing up, it was still very much a real thing. I was considered ugly because I was dark skinned. I was considered ugly because I was an immigrant. And, things like that, it sticks with folks. And I'm working with clients today that are still having those internal conversations because the things that we say, even when it's like pure intended, can be really harmful. Things like, oh, she's pretty for a Black girl, And I don't know if we often connect those dots in those ways. So other things that I want us to be mindful of as we are working and supporting our brothers and nephews and uncles and cousins who are in the early adulthood timeframe is, as they transition into parenting, fatherhood. What does fatherhood look like for some folks? And where do they get the information on what it means to be a father? Is it from their own father, the lack of or the presence of, or is it how their mother or other caregivers showed up? And then it makes me think about, I'm working with a client right now. He's a 16-year-old adoptee. He was adopted from Africa. He identifies as Black, and his parents are white European parents. And so a lot of, for him, as it pertains to like what fatherhood looks like, there's a bit of, he's not a father, but as he's growing and understanding relationship with father and men and what does it mean for him to be a father one day, a lot of it is influenced by the family he's a part of currently, but it also creates confliction because he recognizes racially they're different, ethnically they're different, and what does it mean for him to connect with his roots? And that sometimes brings a lot of stress and emotional distress for him. I think this is also a time, again, as we talk about intimacy versus isolation, is where individuals start to develop and form romantic relationships. Platonic relationships, yes, but romantic relationships specifically. I had a client that I was working with a while back who was in his mid to late 30s and identified as a virgin. Cishet, Black male, 36 at the time while we were working together, was in his first relationship and was still a virgin. And for him, there was a lot of like worriedness around the judgment around that, around his ability to perform, around his understanding of what intimacy can look and feel like out of the context of pornography, understanding what does it mean to share space with someone in an intimate way in person. And so that was contributing to a lot of his stress and distress in the work that we were doing together, and was causing experiences of increased substance use and misuse, depressive symptoms. He was living and working in New York City in a high stress job or career. And so all of these things compounded, in addition to like his familial challenges, created a lot of challenges for him. On paper, you would think, oh, this is a successful Black man doing all the things, right? As we go back to the best case scenario, from presents as like being in a healthy family system, have peer support and relationships, career measures are satisfied, and can have space to express a range of emotions. But that space was confined for the therapeutic space. Because outside of therapy, he had to show up a certain way and be a certain kind of Black man within his community. And I think one of the things that we often don't spend a lot of time talking about, and I'll digress a little bit, is the impacts of loss and transition within our community during this age range. I don't know if we spend a lot of time talking about when we experience loss, whether it's romantic loss or relationship breakup, etc., or the loss of a loved one who've transitioned onto the other side. We don't spend a lot of time talking about when the folks who die earlier die young. And I think wishful thinking, we all grow up, talking about when I get old, or when I get older, me and my family, or me and my kids, or I'm going to have grandkids, etc. But I think we're all old enough to know that that is not the reality for everyone. So what does it look like to support someone who's lost someone in their life at a young age, right? Whether it's a parent, a friend, a best friend, or anything of that sort. Now, I know I've shared a lot. I've dropped a ton of things out there, so I'm going to digress a little bit. I don't know if any of the fellows want to check in or add anything to that.
I want to add one thing, and in some ways, I think it's connected to loss as well. So forgive, you all know we're educators, so forgive the educator, me coming out here, is when we talk about loss now, especially in the world of counseling and doing therapy, is it's more about the process of loss, because at the end of the day, all loss is often connected to loss of identity, loss of a sense of self. And I wanted to share a brief example. I'm working with I was gonna say young Black man, but I mean, he's just younger than me. I guess that's what young is these days. I'm working with a young Black man now. He's a lawyer, and he grew up in Long Island, predominantly white neighborhood. He is of Haitian descent, and as far as he's concerned, he did all the things he was supposed to do. He went to school, he got good grades, he went to college, he went and got his JD, and now, sticking in Long Island in New York, he's working in addition to being from a predominantly white environment, he's now working at a predominantly white law firm. And he reached out to me, this was a couple of weeks ago, he reached out to me and literally said, he goes, I'm not sure what I'm reaching out for. My primary care provider said that I should talk to a therapist. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure why. So we met and we talked. And what I heard this brother talking about was just how difficult it is for him to exist in these environments that he's chosen to and sort of has to exist at this point, as a person who has achieved all of the goals that he set out for himself. Now he's existing in a place and realizing, I don't think I want to exist here. I am angry here. I am frustrated here. And even though we haven't been working together that long, we are already talking about what it means to mourn the idea of what he thought being a Black lawyer would be, and now starting to figure out, okay, what does it mean for me to actually be a Black lawyer in Long Island, in these predominantly white spaces? What does it mean for me to exist here if I choose to exist here ongoing? So I appreciate Dr. Ferguson bringing up loss, because so much of what we go through, certainly, don't get me wrong, kids are not exempt from loss, unfortunately, but certainly as we get into our young adulthood to middle adulthood years, is loss of identity, loss of what we believed to be true. He's mourning the idea of what he thought a lawyer would be. He almost had this idea that I got my JD, I made it, like I'm done. And now he's realizing that a lot of the dynamics that he grew up with, that he thought the JD would save him from, they continue to exist. And he has to renegotiate what it means for him to engage as a lawyer in these spaces now. I'll stop there, but I wanted to make sure I shared that.
if I could hopefully provide something additive, when we're thinking about some of the unique considerations for Black men and their mental health, I just really appreciate Dr. Ferguson and Dr. Nadrich zoning in on career challenges, right? Black boys and men, and we can argue boys and men cross-culturally are socialized to be financial providers. And that is a message that we get pretty consistently. Whatever you do, make sure, it doesn't matter the kind of relationship you may have with the other parent of your child or children, you better make sure you provide for them. And to the extent you can or can't, could be a source of psychological distress, right? So thinking about career identity, who am I? Am I a lawyer? Am I a sanitation worker? Am I a teacher? Am I an engineer? What did it take for me to get there? Can I have pride in the thing that I'm doing professionally or not? Those many times function as badges of honor, right? And we're all very, very acutely aware of the way we can, the Black community and white folks and the folks from other communities, we assign value to certain careers, and that can weigh very heavily on Black men if and when they're negotiating the world. Is this job something that I can tell other people about with pride? Chris Rock has I won't disrespect myself by trying to run a Chris Rock joke, but he has this bit where he talks about when in heterosexual relationships, Black men are not asked who they are; they're asked what do they do, right? It's not about who you are; it's like what does that Negro do, right? And while we may laugh about the silliness and the what's the word I'm looking for, and the lack of depth in that kind of question, I'm here to suggest to everybody who's under the sound of my voice that that's a real deal consideration, right? And to the extent that I can have as a man and as a father figure, even if I ain't got no biological kids, can I go into spaces with other people and be proud of talking about what I do for a living to sustain myself, knowing that there are some professions that are much more celebrated and have a measure of currency that others don't, even if the ones that don't have the measure of currency earn more money, right? But you go somewhere and say you're a sanitation worker or you're on janitorial staff, and your benefits run circles around mine. But if I say I'm a professor, then that's going to open doors for me that many folks won't experience for no good reason, right? Or for not a lot of good ones anyway. And so the notion of career development, career identity, and being on a pathway toward career satisfaction and pride is a significant amount of work for Black men, Black boys and men, as they think about who they are and that identity that they're willing to share in spaces. I wanted to make sure I said that because career is important for many of us. Sometimes it's too important, but it certainly weighs on the minds and the hearts of many Black men. And I would encourage us all to be considerate of those things as we engage and try to be the right kind of help and love Black men in ways that they need and deserve. I'll stop there.
So do we want to jump into Q&A? I know you guys have a hard stop shortly.
We're fine with that. Yeah, we're fine with that.
Okay. I guess, does anyone have any questions for our three fantastic brothers?
I do, but I'm trying to come on, so bear with me. I heard most of it, but my question is, based on everything they say, what role does a neoliberal capitalist financial system play in this whole thing? Anybody or everybody can answer or address.
I'm gonna jump in really fast. Thank you for the question. What role is a neoliberal capitalist system? Yeah, neoliberal. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Linda. Were you finished, Linda? Go ahead, Michael. I don't know where she's.
It's fine, and that's some of the joys and challenges of being not in the same physical space. Linda, here's my 2 cent take. Neoliberal capitalism can absolutely have an effect on our mental health and well-being because in any
Right.
capitalist environment,
Neoliberal. Right.
neoliberal,
Exactly.
sure. Any capitalist system, the bottom line is production and exploitation. So what can the institution get from the employer? What can the institution or employer get from the employees with the least amount of investment, but the highest expectation? And that can be absolutely crippling and damaging to anybody's psyche, let alone a Black man who is doing their best to meet expectations, to provide a living for him and his family. So that's the first thing I would say. It can be very dangerous because it can be exploitive without any feeling of reciprocity from the institution that's expecting that from him.
I'll add one thing to that. This is actually something I'm working on with a good friend of mine. We're exploring some of the tenets of what you're asking as it relates to, DEI and higher education. And I would say that if we're thinking about the ways in which capitalism and neoliberalism exist today, and I would even argue perpetuates today, is I would think about the ways in which racial capitalism intersects with that. If we're thinking about from all Black men today, but this is really Black people, but in some ways Black men, we need to consider the ways in which that identity is used in a capitalistic manner. Mike shared before this idea that it's exploitative or it's really about the output. Well, there are places that will put you front and center because you are Black and drop you the moment that you are not useful to them. They will work you more because of your identity and put you in spaces that you have not been primed for, that you are not prepared for, that literally can be harmful to you without consideration of who you are, of what your role is, and what you were brought in to do to begin with. Both of my friends here know this, and I mean this sincerely. We talked a bit before about folks who are lighter skinned, things like that. Every institution that I have been at since I started pursuing my master's degree has used my face in some capacity. And I mean this literally. My master's institution has had my face on their website. My doctoral institution had my face on their website. My first academic institution had my face on their website and on their literally in print graduate catalog. And that was even before I was a full-time employee there. And my current institution tried to put my face somewhere, and I said no. But I want to be clear, that is racial capitalism. They are not putting me out there because of what I have contributed. They are not putting me out there because they value me. They're putting me out there because of something that they believe that they can benefit from because of how I perceive to other people. And if we're thinking about capitalism, we're thinking about neoliberalism, in what ways, especially those that are predominantly white spaces that don't typically have Black representation or Black male representation, in what ways might these systems or institutions use Black men? And how does that affect them? How does that affect them? How does it affect their capacity? How does that affect their sense of self? What does it mean to be put in a place where you're being exploited, not for what you offer? And we're talking about the salience of career, right? If being a professional means a lot to me, now I'm being put in positions that have nothing to do with my professional contributions. It just has to do with who I represent. What does that mean for me? How do I make meaning of that?
Yeah. Well, lastly is about the decolonization. About 2 months ago at Hampton University, there was a bunch of psychologists who got together to talk about how do you decolonize the minds of Black people so that we, kind of take on the resources and the tools and things that helped us navigate through 600 years here until we started abandoning those tools and things that we had ancestrally that we kind of walked away from.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It ties into Carl Johnson's question: does the Black person male mentality differ if they grew up in Europe, Africa, or Australia before living in the USA? That's an interesting question too. I know you guys are pressed for time. There are 4 questions in queue. If we can get to those real quickly, that would be really good. I don't want to take more of your evening than we need to.
Excuse me,
Haraya, we'll start with you,
should I
and
put
then
my
we'll go
question in there in the, excuse me, I'm just sorry. Should I put my question in the to chat?
No, no, you're fine. So we're gonna do Haraya first, Bill Davis, Dave Litscomb, Shelley Thomas, and that'll be the end for questions today. So Haraya, could you go ahead and give your question, please? Thank you.
I really didn't have a question. I had several observations. I'll be very quick.
But we need to be quick and brief. We only got 15 minutes with these guys, so if it's not a question, let's keep it moving. But go ahead.
I had the opportunity, even though I'm a mother of 10, and we just mentioning 10 children means we didn't have a whole lot of money coming along. But I had a daughter that went to Dubai to and finished her education. She's a behavior or something. I don't know, with a PhD now. But anyway, she moved to Dubai, and so she sent tickets for the family at one point, and I was able to take my son, who had grown up in the hood, and we grew up as Muslims and whatever. And I had an aha moment because he left out the house one morning to go to the mosque for a Fajr prayer, which is like 5 in the morning, and he ran. And I just could pick up the vibe that he was just so elated just to be able to run along the street at 5 in the morning as a Black man. And it just was an aha moment for me, because if he had done that in Philadelphia, where we're from, he might have been picked up, or seen as a robber or whatever. So that was one thing I wanted to bring out. I live in a very a prominent suburban area, the Lower Marion area of Philadelphia, where Kobe Bryant grew up and everything. But it is the school district is a Blue Ribbon School District. So out of the handful of Black communities that are here in the Lower Marion suburb, you wonder why the Black men do so bad. Now there's some that do excellent and become judges, doctors, lawyers, but the majority fall by the wayside. So another aha moment for me was to realize that coming up in a school district where there's never barely any Black teachers, and in an environment where all the young men around you are white and affluent, even though you have the best of education, the best of housing, and the best living environment, it is a depression to the young Black male, because he doesn't see himself in any of these successful, he's not living in a house with a pool and so on and so forth, or whatever. So even though he has the best resources at his hands, it still makes him fall by the wayside. That's the point that I was getting to. And then I just wanted to make a observation.
Love you, Miss Bay, but we got to move on. There's 3 more hands, and these guys
God
have
bless.
less.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Davis, what's your question, dear? Good to see you today.
Helen, it's always a pleasure. I'm going to congratulate these brothers. I certainly appreciate the information and insights that they offered. And so, Helen, I know that
Yes.
we're short for time, but I do have a couple of points that I do think we should all consider. One is that one of the issues that kind of got touched on but not really fully explored was social class. And so if we think about what happens to, and since we're disproportionately poor, what happens to poor Black families with young men, or Black families in general, right? And so for the benefit of these young brothers, I am a senior citizen, raised 4 children by myself. So I face these challenges, sons and daughters. So I'm very sensitive to it. So I think that we should, spend a little time on that. Second, I think that we should, there's some examples, hopefully, that you guys could provide of places where the kind of therapy, the kind of I operate from the premise that we need to build a village. So I want to congratulate Helen and Black Women Gather for building this village for us to come together and have these conversations. So for families, I'm working with Black families now to have children special education. I know one of these brothers is doing some work in Jersey. So fam, I definitely want to connect with you because we're doing some work with Black and children special ed. And so for the benefit of all of us, if we don't know, Black men in special ed are disproportionately incarcerated, have more interactions, negative interactions with the police. If we think about the fact that Black women graduate college twice the rate of Black men, if a Black woman wants to marry a Black male, then her, use the Christian term, evenly yoked pool is very small. And so we have to figure out how we're going to strengthen the opportunities, particularly for young brothers who are in special ed. Third point is that, and Helen and I had a conversation about this some time ago. So Helen, I don't know if we could really revisit the idea of having some type of summit at Cleo's spot down in Virginia, in which we could have some Black therapists, male and female, come together to talk about issues that are impacting the Black community, and how do we find or build the examples that we think would be beneficial for the community. Because there's not enough of these conversations taking place so that we will be able to have the kind of impact, we could expand the impact. And so particularly for the work I'm doing with these young brothers in special ed, me and my brother who was in special ed, go to the schools, work with the young brothers in the building, and then with their families outside. And so the stigma of being Black and the stigma of having a disability being in special ed is real serious. And so how do we help people get over these stigmas and realize that, yes, that even though I'm in special ed, I still have opportunities to be able to do things that people may not have anticipated that I would. And the last point is that I'm hoping that you brothers, I'd be curious to get your feedback. There's a group of sisters, I believe, that started this website called Black Men Heal. And so it's a website that anybody can go to. They give Black males free therapy, right? So you check in, they find a therapist in your area. And so, I appreciate the conversation about trying to end the stigma about mental health, because it is a serious one that we really need to address. But when I saw this website for Black Men to Heal, one of my sons has been on there. And so, I want to acknowledge the fact that there are some limited efforts being made for us collectively as a community to address it. So I'll be curious to, get your feedback and examples and whether we can actually figure out a way to do a summit on the Black family at some point in the future. Oh, one last point. Dawn Staley and South Carolina are the champions.
Billy in the house.
That's a guy thing, because I didn't even know
All
that
right,
meant.
all right.
Brother Bill, I was curious about it too. Thank you for the update.
Yeah, that's why I'm on
guy
mute,
thing.
fam. I had to watch the ball game and see the sisters get it done.
Understand. Shout out to Dawn
But the
Staley.
thing that you mentioned with Cleo's place, yes, that is something we can do, and we can even talk to the doctors maybe about being a part of that. So thank you for revisiting that, Bill. And also, I'm going to intervene real quick too. I've seen online more than I've seen before. Black male retreats are happening. So I hope that men are creating spaces where it's just them, no women, and they can just, you guys can just be yourselves. And anyway, but go ahead, you guys, your answer.
No, I was just going to say very quickly, one, thanks for the feedback, Brother Bill. And we've all begun to put some links in the chat where you can access information about Black folks who provide mental health support for communities across the country. Any one of those links hopefully is helpful, being able to connect people to therapeutic support. That's all I was going to say.
Anything else? I think Bill's first question had to do with class. And I guess access to services classes in terms of class is a big thing too. Does anybody have anything you want to share on that?
No, I think class is a big one. And I know I spoke a little bit about ethnicity and immigration status and migrants, et cetera. But I do think class is a huge piece, right? I also did speak about, the video that I referenced from the 60s and, how social class kind of impacts the way in which us as Black people come together and or either like buy into this idea of respectability politics and keep us segregated, which obviously as a larger community, it allows white presenting folks or European folks to like maintain a level of power if they can divide us. But I do think, to your point, Bill, class really impacts access to resources, right? Access as in like what's affordable, or whether you have insurance or don't have insurance. What kind of resources or services do you experience? Should you be on Medicaid, et cetera? I remember working in the city. I worked in New York City for a while, and I worked at a community agency where I was one of, like, let's say 15 therapists. And we took all range of insurance, and we did walk-in, and we did sliding scales, which was great. And in the same token, I was the only Black male there. So a lot of my colleagues who did the same work that I did identified as cisgender, heterosexual white women. And this was in Harlem, by the way. And within that, in the same token, I had a caseload of 117 clients when I left. I was doing 45-minute sessions, 30-minute sessions, in and out, and that's not sustainable. So even though we were accessing a range of folks from different SDS, and it was like a one-stop shop for everyone, the way in which, and I think we've talked about this, way in which I was inundated with clients, it really didn't allow me enough capacity to do quality work. And I think that's the sad reality of it is that, you know, folks who are Black and brown folks who are working in this field, who want to be in the trenches and working with our community, there's also the piece of being overutilized and increasing the likelihood of burnout. So it's been challenging, even for me personally, to find the balance within that. So the way in which I've found the balance today, thus far, is, you know, I have a private practice that I've hired right now, only folks of color, and we practice across 3 states. We see clients in Jersey, New York, as well as Florida, and we take a lot of the major insurances. And about 95% of our clientele identify as Black people. And so, you know, I know there's pockets of us who are doing this kind of work and creating access to the communities that we are a part of and we want to serve, but I know there's still much more work to do. I know Dr. Hannon, all of us have done research around how Black people are engaging or entering the counseling field to create more spaces and more opportunities to work with our community across the different SES statuses. But I don't foresee it being, if you will, balanced out for another decade or 2.
That's a big plus that you take insurance.
Yeah.
Okay,
I take a lot of the major
thank you.
insurance.
David Lipscomb.
Mr. Lipscomb,
Yes.
we're ready for
Yeah.
you. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you. I've enjoyed this conversation. But the one thing that I wanted to say is that I know I put in the chat about being the magical Negro, being the one that has to have all the answers and everything. And I think that's a big thing for Black men, professional or otherwise. How do we more or less alleviate that pressure? Because that's a big one. I suffered from it. I had one big assignment, and like you're saying, unattainable hours, this, that, and the other. And I had to take a whole year off because I just couldn't, I had no more rabbits to pull out the hat. You know, so how do you deal with that?
So I'll jump in. Appreciate the question, David. I'm not quite sure how you explicitly deal with it. Here are some suggestions that I'm thinking though, and I don't know if these were helpful at the time or even in retrospect. I can't underscore the importance of community. I can't overstate the importance of community. Like the other guys, you know, we're all doing active clinical work, and I run a support group for fathers of autistic people. And we get together on a monthly basis, maybe in some ways very similar to when Black women gather. And for Black fathers of autistic people to be able to come to a space where they don't have to translate anything and everybody's literally speaking the same language is an opportunity to not just create deeper connections, but to feel seen and heard in ways that you may not be getting outside of that time. So the importance of community, I think, is critical. And then whether you're in a large community or you have a network, a small network of other Black men who have similar shared experiences, I can't overstate the importance of your own physical wellness. right? Whatever you can do, whether that means taking a walk, whatever exercise means to you, whatever physical activity may mean to you, these are things that we know reduce symptoms of anxiety and mediate symptoms of depression, right? I'm not even suggesting that you were clinically depressed or you had an anxiety condition. I'm saying, though, that when we feel ourselves ramping up, there are things that we can physically engage in to help reduce and mitigate some of those symptoms. And so those are two recommendations, right? If you can find community where you know people understand your story and you don't have to do a whole lot of explaining, but just showing up and sharing, and then making sure you do have your own personal wellness, an inexpensive, right? It's something that doesn't break the bank, but an
Right.
inexpensive way that you invest in yourself unapologetically, and find some commitment to maintaining. Two suggestions that I hope were helpful.
Yeah, it was helpful. I do have a therapist, so that helps with medication and everything else, you know. So I really took care of that issue, but I know it affects a lot of people, how we're expected to be Superman all the time. Have all the answers. Like he said, I think Dr. Nadrich said that, you know, how he's used with his face because they're getting something from it. And it's one of those things that, you know, as Black men, we have to deal with on a daily basis. We just can't be regular people. You know, we have to be magical. You know.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the only thing I'll add, or perhaps even just sort of take and translate into different language that Dr. Hannon said, is, you know, when I think about the question you're asking, I think about it through two lenses, locally and systemically. Locally, I hear you talk, we're talking about community, we're talking about therapy, we're talking about doing our own work. You know, the language that I would use as a therapist is, you know, this narrative of I must do. How's that serving us? What is it doing for us? Is it helping us reach our goals faster? Is it helping our physical and mental well-being, right? That's the local portion that I hear us talking about. And systemically, and this is the harder part, right? Because we've been talking about, you know, we've had a few conversations here that fall under the umbrella of what I call resources. When I say words like resources, I think when counselors say words like resources, we don't just mean socioeconomics. We don't just mean financial. We mean resources overall. How much you got, right? How much energy do I have? How much mental health do I have? How much physical energy am I able to do, on top of how much money do I have? How much time do I have? This is resources overall. And if we have the resources to combat things systemically, that's pointing. I'm thinking about a client right now. I'm working with one client. He's very high achieving in tech, and he's encountered this idea of being expected to do more. He is, you know, one of
I'm
the
in tech.
yeah. Okay. So he is one of the onlys, right? He's the only one on the team. He's the only one who's made team leader. And he's at a position now in his life where he feels he has the resources to, when those reviews come up or when those meetings come up, he can say, hey, I'm wondering what rubric you're putting me against versus my colleagues. Help me understand how these things stack up. He has the resources to challenge those notions systemically now. And I want to be careful. Not everyone has those resources, right? The job might mean too much. I don't have the words to do it. I don't have the courage. I don't have the energy. I don't have the space. But if we do, challenging it locally is important. Our team, our own mental, all of that. And if we can break it out to systemic, because it's both. It's not just an internalized narrative. It's a systemic narrative. So the ideal there is to approach those types of narratives through both directions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, go with your question. Thank you.
Yes, my question is very brief. Just wonder what your thoughts were from a solutions perspective about the Blaxit movement of Blacks leaving the United States, which is definitely my goal to relocate to South Africa. It was the first time in my life, as much as I've traveled broadly, that I felt genuine peace when I visited South Africa. So just any thoughts about that?
My immediate thought, I don't have much of a thought, but my immediate thought is, should you have the resources to do it, as Dr. Nadrich was saying? It sounds like an amazing idea.
I have a somewhat tongue-in-cheek thought that I know had been going around whatever internet streams I've been a part of, but there was a joke saying that I thought I was depressed, but then I just realized I live in the United States. So I hear that, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to make of something like that. I understand where it comes from. So, but I'm not sure what the consequences or what more to make of that, except for empathizing with it.
And the only thing I'll add, hopefully it's complimentary, is that Shelley, I've heard similar feedback from folks who have the opportunity to travel overseas, to be in spaces where it's predominantly Black and brown, and to have some measure, an increased feeling of peace and tranquility that increases their quality of life. And so while I don't have a whole lot of, I wish I could say I had a whole lot of international travel experience, I have heard a similar narrative that folks who are able to travel do have the kind of experience that you're referencing now. So I appreciate you sharing it, and it gives me something to think about for my own aspirations.
I'll just add to
Yeah,
that I do have, I'm sorry,
go ahead,
I do
Shelley.
have a son I wanted to share that I do have a son on the spectrum, and I raised him as a single mom, as an attorney and healthcare professional. And I felt, in addition to my own stress relief, that would possibly be a solution for him. We were so celebrated in other spaces abroad in a way that I've not experienced in the United States, that I just think, again, from a mental health perspective, that they may give him opportunities to just be without the added pressure of what that means as a Black male, albeit a Black male with anxiety disorder or being on the spectrum. All that aside, I just felt like that may be the one opportunity he has to just be and experience that and decide for himself if the United States is the right place for him.
Thank you for sharing that, as I have an
Yeah,
autistic
I
son
guess
myself.
as someone who travels, there's just something about leaving the United States. And it's almost immediate, the calmness and the peacefulness that you experience. Not to mention, um, because you're not eating fake food, you're eating real food, that your skin, I mean, without even trying, you're losing weight, your skin looks good, your hair looks good. It's just amazing. So, it's a
Helen,
decision that
also the cost of living. The cost of living is extraordinarily a huge advantage, and I'm close to retirement age, and our money goes so much further with a similar quality of life in some countries. So anyway, thank you for
absolutely.
sharing.
Well, guys, you've done it again. This has been a very interesting exchange, and I can't thank you enough for showing up for us again. And I hope that maybe this is an annual thing. We'll have you come back once a year. And then Bill, I'm sure Bill's going to be in touch with you, Michael. And, it's possible that we can do something in Virginia all together. I don't know if Gary's on this call, but Gary sends his love, of course. Did you ladies have any? Well, let me ask the guys first. Do you have any closing remarks that you want to share with us before we let you go?
I'll just express my gratitude. Thank you for the invitation again. It's always great to spend time with you in this community. That's what I'll say. I appreciate y'all.
Likewise.
Okay, I'm going to make you say something, Alfonso.
Yeah, I was gonna say same, but
Likewise.
it's right, likewise. But it's always great to share space with you all. So thank you for having us.
You guys are great. Michelle brought you all to us. Michelle, do you have any, and Kilpia, you guys have any closing remarks before we sign off?
Just that I'm grateful for you guys sharing your time and your talents with this group. It's just wonderful to see y'all, the energy, the excitement, the information that y'all share. It's just marvelous for me. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And I would also echo that and just say thank you so much for coming and for sharing with us again. And someone asked about when do you know you need to, I guess, attend to your mental health. And to me, it's like, even if nothing's wrong with your body, you should be checking in with with your doctor. And that's not to say that you have to go to a therapist, but certainly if family is suggesting it, or, you know, back in the day, I know a bunch of people from New York, and it's way back in the day, but everybody had a therapist. It's like, it was like a thing, you know, and I was from South Jersey. I didn't really understand it, but there's always probably at some point, sometime in your life when you could use some support. So thank you all for everything.
Yep. In our
Thank
community,
you.
we need to run from this. But Michael, you're teaching. Young people now seem not to associate the stigma with mental health care as we did. I'm sorry, I'm much older than you guys, as my generation did.
Yeah, I
Is
would
that,
agree. I would
are you
agree.
finding that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree. I think we would all say there seems to be an openness to our overall health and well-being, not just physical health and well-being among younger generations than maybe even my own generation. I ain't gonna talk about how the difference in our ages, but I'm 48, and my friends, they still be like, "Yeah, I ain't going to no therapist." So that's how, yeah. But the younger folks, y'all know I have two children. I have a 21-year-old and soon to be 20-year-old, and they and their friends are much more open than I've seen in other in my friends and peers.
So there's hope for the future. All right, on that note, if everybody can unmute and show some love to the doctors, and we'll let them get on with their evening, and we can hang out for just a few more minutes afterwards so I can tell you what's coming up. But if everybody can, I'm gonna take up, you all can help me remove the spotlights. Is there something that lets me remove all spotlights at once? I don't even know.
I want to thank you
Yes.
guys for being successful Black men, you know,
Yes.
being there so that we can have somebody to go to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sharing knowledge and experience.
Thanks. It was a great session.
And if you're somebody who's been
Thank
here for the
you.
first time today, please come again.
Definitely.
Wait, I'm trying to remove. Okay, so on that note, we'll let the doctors go. We'll stop recording. We'll talk for a few minutes about what's coming up, and then everybody can just get on with their afternoon. Oh, there's somebody. I'm sorry, I'm going to do this. I really shouldn't, but there's a phone person with their hand up. Did you want to ask a question real fast? Because I always ignore the phone people. Did you have a quick question? 678.
Yes, Helen, I love you. Who do I go see after that earthquake experience?
We'll talk in a minute about the earthquake. I love you too. Okay, so thank you, docs. You all can clock out if you wish to, and the rest of us will hang out. And
Thank you,
Orlando,
brothers.
we need to hook
Appreciate you.
up. I'm not that far from you, Alfonso. We need to make a point of meeting since we're in the same state.
Take good care, folks.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye,
Growing, brother.
Michael. All right. Okay, everybody, I'm going to stop the recording and tell you what's coming up for next week. If I can find the stop recording. And Kilpia and Michelle, thank you so much for, continuing this conversation that we're doing on mental health. That's the only one we've done this year. I don't know if you guys have anything else planned, but it's clearly a conversation that people take a lot from. So let's keep them going. All righty. So.